Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, and you join me once again on Vulcanus. In last week's video we looked at how Sophia got the planet up and running and how we're producing all of the basic ingredients you need to make a happy planet. Things like iron and copper and steel and plastic and so on, and all of the machinery required to produce them and turn them into more useful things. In today's video we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into the more specifically Vulcanian things and what makes this planet special and why we wanted to come out here. And so the big thing you get from this planet is tungsten, which allows you to make foundries, but also is an important part in the next science pack. And so we've got this is the same mine we were looking at last time, but a few more drills have been stuck in here. And you can see, looking at the way things are laid out, that one of the difficulties of Vulcanus is that it's full of lava. And the lava kind of gets in the way when we're trying to build. So as you can see, we've got the drills a little bit scattered, and then we've got these crushing systems. Well, rather than just having one nice big array of crushing machines, we've got them a little bit spread out and scattered in wherever we were able to find a convenient place to put them, which is a little bit silly, but it does allow us to get them all in here in roughly the right sort of area. We've then got belts winding their way out from here, so the crushing is a lot like you'll probably be used to from seeing crushing metals on other planets. We take in the tungsten ore, and then it spits out a variety of things. We get some crushed tungsten ore out, which is what we're after. We get some of the ore back again because it didn't get crushed properly. And then we get some coal and some stone as byproducts. So the ore that hasn't been crushed properly just gets spat back out down the bottom here, goes back in here, and is prioritised and used first. So that's nice and easy. You can just loop that back round again. The stone we're throwing away because we don't actually need it, so it's just getting chucked into the lava to be burned away in there. And then the coal is being passed up a belt over here to be taken away and used in the rest of the factory. Lovely. The bit we're actually interested in, though, is the crushed tungsten, which is coming up along here, along this belt, and then we're doing a number of things with that. So we've got an improved and slightly bigger facility for making lots of tungsten triangles because we need a decent quantity of them, and that brings in carbon, which is made, I think, from boiling coal in acid or something like that, along with some more sulfuric acid. And that produces the tungsten carbide, so we can bring those out and use those for various things, like making some of the big drills and whatnot. But also we can bring in the crushed tungsten ore up here and feed it into these foundries, along with some molten iron, which is coming from lava, as you'd probably expect. And that's then being turned into the tungsten steel, which is being brought around here on a nice long belt to give it a chance to cool before it's passed off to be used elsewhere. And this tungsten steel is sort of the big resource that you require on this planet. You do use tungsten carbide, especially for some of the earlier things, but I feel like the tungsten steel is the one that gets used a bit more. And then, yes, as I say, that's then brought in over here. Yes, we've got a belt bringing it up here where it's combined with the tungsten carbide and some molten copper that's being made made from lava as usual, and that's being turned into orange science packs, the metallurgic science pack, and those can then be passed off via a chest for some reason, and those are being passed off to rocket silos, and that's going to allow us to take them up onto a spaceship where they can be shipped over to Nauvis, where all of our science labs are, and they can be combined with all of the other science packs we've already got there to produce all kinds of useful researches. Additionally, we've got a supply of the tungsten steel and the tungsten carbide coming in and being passed into boxes here, where it can then be fed into these two rockets, and that's going to allow us to ship those resources out to Nauvis as well, which is going to be very, very useful. And additionally, we've done the same sort of thing with calcite, because this is the only planet I'm aware of where calcite can be produced. I believe it can also be made in space, but at the moment, this is where we're getting it. This is where we're getting it from if we should need it anywhere else. Now that's quite a lot of tungstens required for that. So we've expanded the factory quite a bit, and Mark and I have built up a new processing facility for even more tungsten up here in the north. And that's being pulled from this tungsten ore patch over here, where you can see we've got another slightly awkward drill set up. It's doing quite well. We've got a quantity of tungsten ore being brought out from here, and a little bit more from a smaller patch down here as well. And that's being brought into a much, much bigger crushing system. And in theory, this should be crushing down an entire blue belt and producing a quantity of crushed tungsten ore, which can then be brought all the way down here and going nowhere. These ones down here, however, those are being brought out and fed into these machines where we've got even more foundries. Once again, we're pulling in the lava in order to make the molten iron, and then feed it into the machines over here to make the tungsten steel, which can then be fed off down a belt, and we've got plenty of it, which is going to be great. We're going to have an almost unlimited supply. Well, we're going to have a fantastic supply from here that's going to keep us going for absolutely ages. This is going to be great. We're also bringing down some more of the crushed tungsten down here, and that's being fed into the same tungsten triangle production down here, but as a lower priority. The idea is that we would like to use up this patch first because it's in a slightly awkward place and the processing is all a little bit of a mess because of the way we've tried to squeeze it in amongst the lava patches, and also because we don't really have a convenient place to build. Whereas up here we're able to put in these nice long columns, which makes everything a little bit neater. And so that's going to give us an opportunity to make the tungsten a bit more neatly, and it's going to be a lot more expandable as well, which is great. So that should keep the system going here very well. Additionally, the coal production in here has been expanded, and the coal consumption by all of these machines that are turning it into oil has also been expanded, because it turns out we need rather a lot of plastic to do everything we want to do. So that's been expanded out quite a lot. I put in an additional coal mine up here, which is allowing us to produce a bit more coal, and that's being fed down some rather long belts down into the factory down here, and basically being dropped in the same place as the coal is being produced here. So all of these belts are coming in, and then they're being fed in as a low priority, because we would like to use up this coal patch as soon as we can, and then we can remove all of these drills, then potentially use this area for then potentially expanding the bottom wall in, as well, and anything else that we feel like we need. We've got a little bit of a sort of things grew organically, so some of the designs are a little bit weird. And so as Sophia has, as I said, massively expanded the oil production, which means we now have healthy plastic production running up here, which means we now can feed up the plastic out to the rest of the factory, and specifically to the circuit production area that I've built. And so this is, again, Sophia's briefing for this was he wanted everything to be sort of reasonably self-contained, all running off their own separate lava pumps. And this is interesting because it's different to the way I did it in my Space Age run, where I was thinking on a much more sort of traditional Factorio style, where I pulled out loads of lava at the bottom, fed that through all of my foundries to turn it into the molten metals, and then pumped the molten metals on pipes up along my bus, and then built things off the bus. Whereas this system is much less bus-based. Sophia has used a lot more bots, and has also separated areas out a bit more, which I think is quite interesting. And I would like to sort of think about it and almost sketch it out a bit, because we've got, as it is, obviously got coal here, and then there's the oil production going on down here, which allows us to make plastic, which then allows us to make circuits in this sort of area. And then there's not that much being fed from this area over to here. This is kind of a separate area that's got its own separate coal feed in order to make the carbon. And then we've got the various belts being made over here from their own feeds of various resources that once again is being pumped out of the lava. And then we've got the tungsten areas over here, and again they're all very, very self-contained, which I think is actually quite nice, with only limited numbers of belts going between them, rather than having a massive main bus that's just trying to do everything. So yeah, I quite like this design. I feel it's, because of the way it's grown organically, it's a little bit of a mess, and there's quite a tangle of spaghetti in all kinds of places, particularly over here, and I will admit that I somewhat leaned into the spaghetti, and I'm not going to say I tried to make it worse, but I didn't really try to make it better either. So I will accept some blame for that, although I claim no responsibility for this whole belt area over here. This was this appears to have been Sophia's doing, so we can blame him for that one. Anyway, over here, yes, so I'm making the circuits by pumping large quantities of lava out, and then that can be turned into the iron plates and the copper cables that are required to make the green circuits. And this area has grown slightly awkwardly because I messed up the numbers on it, and I don't know how, but I messed up the numbers, and Sophia kept looking at my working, giving me poor marks and telling me to go back and sort it out and do it properly. So I have, rather than just throwing things together to produce a large quantity of things, this is all, I think, pretty much set up to ratio. And so what the way this is working is we've got the iron plates coming out here, and they're being put into these boxes in order to cool before they're then taken out by these inserters, which are filtered to just the iron plates. And this mattered because we were getting a lot of hot stuff coming along here and then not being able to be put into the assembly machines because the belts weren't long enough for it to cool off properly. So again, over here we've got the copper cables being fed in, and then they cool off, and then once they have cooled they can then be unloaded onto the belts. So that's making green circuits in exactly the normal way. We're mixing them together with a stirrometer on here, and then bring them off over here, where a load are going up here to be made into red circuits, along with that plastic we talked about earlier from Sophia's area, and then fed down here. Half of them are being fed down here in order to make blue circuits, which they're passing on, and then we've got all the different circuit types being passed off this way, red, green and blue. Those are being fed into a module production area that Tristan made, so we've now got good supplies of tier 1 and tier 2 modules in this area, so we can go around. We can, if we want, shove all kinds of modules into all kinds of machines and get more stuff out, so that's nice. And then flanking that, for some reason, we've got solid fuel production and rocket fuel production, with the solid fuel being passed around here to be made into the rocket fuel. I think that might have been just a bit of a let's squeeze this in wherever it'll go type affair there. And then that's being fed up, along with the blue circuits and the low density structures that I talked about earlier, into the rocket silos over here to allow us to build up the rockets. So that's going really, really well. those of you who are paying attention will have taken a look at this bulk belt production area over here and noted that we're still making wooden belts, and you'll be wondering where on earth we're getting the wood from. And yes, it is from this belt. Where does this belt go? Okay, it comes all the way over to here, where Tristan has set up a system that is running through the sulfuric bacteria cultivation system. And this is another one of the sort of the organic type spoilage based recipes where you can find a little bit of sulfuric bacteria by mixing coal and calcite together in sulfuric acid, and then there is a 2% chance of getting out some sulfuric bacteria. And so this is a very, very slow recipe that it took quite a long time to actually produce the first bacteria. However, fortunately, then you can feed those into one of these machines, which is a sulfuric bacteria cultivation machine, and that takes in sulfuric bacteria and some calcite and sulfuric acid as food for them, I suppose, and produces 4 sulfuric bacteria. So that you can then feed out onto the belt. They can then be scooped back up by this machine, by the other inserter, and they'll just go round and round in here and making more and more and more, and that'll allow them to be passed along to feed all of these machines. But the thing about sulfuric bacteria is they spoil, and they spoil quite quickly, but they spoil into wood. So as soon as you've got some of them running along the belt along here, they'll fairly quickly start turning into wood, and then you can start dropping, and then you can start feeding the wood out along here and sending it off to be turned into, well, into belts and ammunition and anything else you might need it for. And so this is a handy way of generating the wood basically from nowhere, which is very nice. The problem is though that because the expiry time on the wood is quite short, you can end up running out of the sulfuric bacteria, as you can see along here. And so we have an emergency restart system on the end over here, which monitors the amount of sulfuric bacteria on the belt all the way along here, and if there isn't any, then it goes, oh no, we've run out, and it turns this inserter on, and we can then start feeding in some coal from here. Unfortunately, whilst that bit has worked, we don't seem to have any calcite in the machine. So this belt here has apparently at some point fed into this machine to allow it to keep supplied, and now no longer does. So some fixing is going to be required there. Maybe we'll put in a splitter here and loop the belt back round in over here and move this one out a bit. It's all a bit of a mess, so that's going to need to be sorted. The other downside of this is that it takes quite a long time to actually get the sulfuric bacteria together and flowing when you run through this recipe, and so we could end up not having any wood being produced for a little while. However, we are using it quite slowly, and there is enough buffer on this belt that I don't actually see that being a problem. I think even with this taking a little while to get started again, it's still going to be absolutely fine. Additionally, in this area, we have a system that pulls in a certain amount of the sulfuric bacteria and turns it into sulfur. This is called pruning, apparently, and apparently you wash the sulfuric bacteria and it turns into sulfur. I don't know, but anyway, this allows us to get some sulfur, which is apparently being run all the way around here to go into a chest. I'm not sure why the chest is all the way around here, rather than just having it down here out of the way, but it is, and so that is going to allow us to then take away sulfur for whatever we need that for. Additionally, at the other end, we seem to have a sort of emergency overflow system, and I'm not quite sure what the reasoning behind this is. So in here, we're monitoring the amount of sulfuric bacteria and outputting it as wood, so, as well as reading off the belt here, and then that's being combined with the signal from the belt. So we've got, coming along here as the wood signal, we've got a total of the amount of bacteria and wood on the belt, which is sort of fair enough. And then if there's more than 225 of it, then we dump wood onto here to be taken away down this belt, down here, and thrown into the lava or right at the bottom. Okay. Additionally, if there's more than 230, which is slightly more, then we'll also start unloading sulfuric bacteria and dumping that down to be put into the lava as well. Yeah, I'm not sure why we're doing that. I guess it's probably in an attempt to keep the belt flowing even when we're not using any wood in the rest of the factory, in order to make sure that the sulfuric bacteria on the belt stays alive and the system can keep churning round and round and round to keep everything up and running. In theory, if you make sure the belt keeps running, you can make sure the bacteria keeps flowing, and therefore you can keep making new stuff, and it'll come out, and you'll always have some reasonably fresh bacteria. We've had further expansion of power generation, so this is off to the western end of the base, where we've got some pump jacks in here pulling up the sulfuric acid and then feeding it over to here, with a little bit of calcite being brought in from the big calcite mine down here that I think Mike has expanded and tidied up a lot of the belts that are carrying the calcite around the factory. Because we do seem to be using that in quite a lot of places. So for the oil, for power, for making metals, and so on and so on. It's quite a popular resource on this planet. It gets used in quite a lot of places, but not in particularly large quantities. And so yes, Sophia has managed to generate some more power over here. I've also been off and tapped another sulfuric acid patch up here, which is being pumped down into the main part of the base, because we will probably need some more at some point. And I think that brings you pretty much up to date on what's been going on this planet. There's been a few little things, like expanding the lube production here, because we're making a lot of electric engines and blue belts, and there was something else that needed lube as well. And then because of that, I've also expanded out the engine and electric engine production down here, because we had a bit of a shortage of them apparently. And that's because we're trying to make massive quantities of the drills and the foundries. I think possibly both of which use electromotors. Certainly the drills do, because we're going to want to start shipping those off to other planets, because they're so much better than the normal drills and the normal furnaces that it'd be silly not to. We want to be able to push these improvements back to our other planets. And so Sophia's ship, the Richard Dean Anderson, is currently in orbit over Vulcanus, and he set this up in quite an interesting way. And so the ship will fly back and forth whenever it's got enough ammunition and when it's got enough water if it's in orbit over Nauvis. And this has been done because when you're in orbit over Vulcanus, you're never quite sure whether you're going to get enough water coming in to keep the ship happy. And in vanilla, that's not a problem, because you don't really consume the water except when you're making fuel. But in Planetary Pioneers, you get through a steady supply of the water because you need to keep growing wood in order to make ammunition, in order to keep the ship defended. And when it's in Vulcanus orbit, it still needs to be defending itself, so you need the ammunition to be coming out and keeping everything fed. And so that means if you just leave a ship sitting in Vulcanus orbit for too long, there is a risk that it will run out of water, and therefore it will start to run out of ammunition. And so Sophia has set the ship up to just leave immediately as soon as it's got enough ammunition to make it safely back over to Nauvis, and then while it's in orbit there, it can top up the water if required, and then once again make sure it's got a good amount of ammunition. And this is interesting because it means the ship doesn't stay in orbit over Vulcanus for all that long necessarily. It's still picking up large quantities of science and tungsten and whatever, all of these things are being fed up to it. It is asking for all of them, but if there's a shortage like there is of the science packs, you can see we've only got 3,000 out of the 6,000, but the ship has left anyway, because it got up to having enough ammunition and it didn't want to risk running out of water. So yeah, this is an interesting and slightly different way of looking at things, but it's kind of necessary because of the weirdness of Vulcanus and how things are a little bit different out there. But yes, eventually this ship will make it back to Nauvis, and then we'll be able to drop in its science pack down into the receiving thing system down here. And yes, we're asking to have at least 1,000 metallurgic science packs in the landing pad. So when they arrive, they'll be fed out, they'll go out up here and be passed through. And as you can see, we've now got a supply of those in this chest as well. So we're gradually topping that up as the ship flies back and forth. And this is allowing us to do all kinds of exciting researches, like cliff explosives and artillery. And these are fantastic because these are going to allow us to expand a bit more freely on Nauvis. We've been having trouble with the biters all the way around the edge of the factory for quite a long time because we can't get rid of them easily. We're not able to defend our pollution cloud. But with the tungsten being brought in, we are now able to start making at least a bit of the artillery system. So you can see here we've got one artillery wagon. That is a good start. We also have another one artillery turret and a handful of artillery shells. I think we might be going to need a slightly bigger production to make these at the rate we wish to. But already we've run out of tungsten plate, so it's not a production problem at the moment. It's a supply problem. But the ship is on its way over, you saw it yourself, and so that's going to mean we'll have some more tungsten available fairly soon, and we'll be able to start making these in slightly larger quantities, and then deciding which direction we want to defend first. And with the cliff explosives, it's going to make pushing the city blocks out a little bit easier as well, because we'll be able to blow up the cliffs in a completely automated bot kind of way. And so that brings us to the end of the episode. I think things have gone really well on Vulcanus. We've managed to get everything up and running. Mark has started building the science packs, as you've seen. We've got Tristan responsible for most of the rocket silo and rocket parts. Sophia, of course, is responsible overall for the planet. Mark and I have got this nice healthy tungsten supply running up here, with him in charge of the crushing and myself in the smelting. And that means basically we can now start shipping out large quantities of the resources that you make on Vulcanus and sending them over to other planets where they're going to be incredibly useful. There'll be another video coming out tomorrow where we'll touch on what we've been getting up to since then, because there is another new planet to go off and investigate, as you might have noticed from the tooltips up here on my map. But I'm not going to show you anything on that one, because that would be spoilers. So yes, I shall be back tomorrow to tell you some more about that. Videos every Thursday and Friday, so please make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of those. We'll also be back on Monday to carry on with the stream and go out and poke at new planets and find new science packs and who knows what else. And also I'll be back on Wednesday when I shall be playing some more Foundry, going out and, well, who knows, making more robot types, selling them, maybe... I've heard some rumours of interesting new types of mining, so maybe I'll be able to investigate one of those. We shall see. Also, I don't know if you've heard, but there is now an official mod for Planetary Pioneers, which you can download from the mod portal in Factorio, and that will allow you to clone all of our planets and all of our quality of life mods, allowing you to play along with basically the same sort of setup that we've got. Now, Tristan and Sophia have been working hard on getting that together and making sure everything looks pretty and works nicely. So, I think that's everything for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.